They deleted Instagram off their phone. Not temporarily, permanently. They stopped scrolling before bed. They quit the dopamine hits cold turkey. And 6 months later, they're still clean. You know that person who actually did it, while everyone else talks about digital detoxes and fails by day 3. Today we're breaking down the psychology of people who quit dopamine and don't relapse. Most people think it's about willpower or motivation, but psychology reveals something completely different. They've rewired how their brain experiences reward itself. Here's what's actually happening in their brains. They've reset their dopamine baseline. Think of your dopamine system like a thermostat. Most people are living at 75 degrees all the time. Constant notifications, endless scrolling, snack-sized content hits. Their brain adapts. It expects that temperature. Anything lower feels unbearable. But people who successfully quit dopamine, they don't just lower the thermostat. They let their entire system recalibrate. They endure the withdrawal, the boredom, the restlessness, the feeling that life has become gray and meaningless. And then something shifts. After about 2 to 3 weeks, their brain stops screaming for stimulation. Subtle pleasures start registering again. A conversation becomes engaging. A book holds attention. A walk feels satisfying. But here's what nobody tells you. Quitting dopamine doesn't mean becoming a monk. These people aren't living stimulation-free lives. They've just changed what kind of dopamine they allow in. They've stopped chasing easy hits and started building reward systems around effort, depth, and delayed gratification. Psychologists call this dopamine fasting, but that term is misleading. You can't actually fast from dopamine. It's literally how your brain signals reward. What you can do is practice what neuroscientists call reward prediction error training. Your brain releases dopamine not just when you get a reward, but when you anticipate one. That ping of your phone, your brain gets the hit before you even check it. That's the addiction loop. People who quit successfully break this anticipation cycle. They remove the cues. No phone in the bedroom. No social media apps. No infinite scroll interfaces. They literally eliminate the environmental triggers that make their brain start craving. And here's the neuroscience. Within 10-14 days, the neural pathways that fire in anticipation of these dopamine hits begin to weaken. The craving doesn't just get easier to resist, it actually diminishes. But willpower alone doesn't sustain this. The people who don't relapse have replaced the dopamine source with something equally rewarding but slower burning. They've discovered what psychologists call intrinsic motivation loops: reading, creating, building, learning, deep work. These activities release dopamine too, but on a different timeline. Not immediate spikes, gradual builds. Now here's where it gets deeper. People who quit dopamine permanently don't see it as deprivation. They see it as identity. Most people try to quit by fighting themselves. I shouldn't check my phone. I need to stop scrolling. I'm wasting time. That's willpower. That's exhausting. That eventually breaks. But people who don't relapse, they've shifted from I can't do this to I don't do this. Watch the language. I can't eat sugar implies restriction. I don't eat sugar implies identity. The first is a rule imposed on you. The second is who you are. And here's the secret. They made this shift by creating an environment that supports their new identity. They don't keep the apps on their phone just in case. They don't browse just for 5 minutes. They've removed the option entirely because environment is stronger than willpower every single time. Think about it. You don't resist brushing your teeth every morning. You just do it. Why? Because the toothbrush is right there. The routine is automatic. The identity is established. People who quit dopamine successfully have done the same thing in reverse. They've made the dopamine-heavy behaviors difficult to access and the healthier behaviors frictionless. Now let's talk about what they gain. Because this isn't just about subtraction. People who successfully quit dopamine report something unexpected. They rediscover their attention span. Not just the ability to focus, but the desire to focus. When your brain isn't getting constant dopamine spikes from easy sources, it starts to find depth rewarding again. A 2-hour conversation becomes engaging instead of exhausting. A challenging project becomes absorbing instead of anxiety-inducing. They've unlocked what psychologists call flow state access, the ability to lose themselves in meaningful work. And here's the neuroscience. Flow states release dopamine too, but in a sustained way that actually strengthens your brain's reward circuitry rather than depleting it. But there's a darker side to this superpower that nobody mentions. Once you've reset your dopamine baseline, going back feels terrible. A person who's been clean for 3 months, who spends an evening scrolling TikTok, doesn't just waste time, they feel physically dysregulated the next day. Anxious, scattered, depleted. They've trained their nervous system to operate at a different frequency. And now the old habits don't just feel wrong, they feel toxic. Here's what society glorifies: productivity hacks, morning routines, optimization, hustle culture. But what actually works? Subtraction. The most disciplined people aren't adding more, they're removing the noise. They're not optimizing their phone use. They're deleting the apps. They're not being mindful about social media. They're quitting it entirely. Society sells you tools to manage distraction. But people who don't relapse understand you can't manage an addiction. You can only eliminate the source. But here's the nuance. For some people, quitting dopamine is liberation. For others, it's avoidance. If you're quitting because you want deeper focus, better relationships, and a calmer nervous system, that's growth. If you're quitting because you're afraid of life, using discipline as a way to control anxiety, or replacing one compulsion with another, that's just a different cage. The difference? People who successfully quit don't become rigid. They become selective. They don't demonize pleasure. They just choose higher quality sources of it. So, who are the people who quit dopamine and don't relapse? They're not superhuman. They're not blessed with extraordinary willpower. They've just done three things most people won't. They endured the withdrawal period without negotiating. They replaced the dopamine source with something deeper, and they shifted their identity from person trying to quit to person who doesn't do this. If you've successfully quit, even if it's only been a week, you're not broken. You're not missing out. You've just discovered that most of what society calls essential is actually optional. What dopamine source did you quit? And how long did it take before you stopped craving it? Drop a comment. I want to know what your breakthrough moment was. And if you want to understand the psychology behind staying disciplined when no one's watching, that video's coming next. One reframe, one rule, one move. Quitting dopamine isn't deprivation. It's upgrading your reward system. If it gives you instant gratification, remove access. If it requires effort, remove friction. Delete one dopamine source from your phone today. Not tomorrow, today.